right. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Senator Erin Maye Quade. I am the co-chair of the Reproductive Freedom Caucus, the state's largest legislative caucus. We are proud today to talk about some of our legislative priorities, as well as our work to stand firmly against the work of the Republicans working to ban abortion in Minnesota and across the country. In the last 4 years, the Reproductive Freedom Caucus has been able to undo 50 years of work to ban abortion in our state, including passing the PRO Act, the Reproductive Freedom Codification Act, requiring health insurance to cover the cost of postpartum care for a year, expand state funding for abortion care and insurance, and to make sure that unregulated pregnancy centers that deceive and coerce pregnant people do not receive state funding, and to invest in babies and healthy families. The Reproductive Freedom Caucus was launched in September of 2021 in anticipation of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which happened just about 9 months later. We are fighting to ensure Minnesota is a place where every person can decide to have a child, not have a child, raise children and families in safe and sustainable communities, and have gender freedom and bodily autonomy. We know that the work to punish people for having abortions, people who help people have abortions, or people who talk about people having abortions, continues in states around us and from the anti-abortion Republicans in Congress. In fact, since the overturning of Roe v. Wade, we have seen infant mortality jump 6% in this country. In states like Texas, who banned abortion before anybody else, we've seen that jump almost 14%, and for Black children, even higher at 23%. We stand here today with the full knowledge, knowing that people who want to ban abortion nationwide and punish people who have abortions are in control of Congress, the White House, and the Supreme Court. And knowing that a national abortion ban is just a comment away, all it would take is Attorney General Bondi to say she's going to enforce the Comstock Act, a 150-year-old law that makes it illegal to mail anything related to abortion. And even more terrifying, when Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry complained to Attorney General Bondi that SHIELD laws were stopping them from extraditing providers to the state of Louisiana and asked for help with consistency, she said, "We'd love to work with you." Make no mistake, an ask for consistency is an ask for a national abortion ban. Republicans are not interested in making the reproductive freedom here that we enjoy in Minnesota consistent for every state across the country. Every day we see anti-abortion zealots and Republicans sink to new lows. A bill in South Carolina was introduced to reclassify contraception so that the morning after pill and IUDs would be illegal, force women with life-threatening pregnancies to be forced into labor and C-sections instead of having abortions, and allow patients to be criminally charged with abortion and make it a felony to even talk about abortion. States are moving to define medication abortion, which is safer than over-the-counter penicillin and Tylenol, as an controlled substance to be tracked and monitored by the state government. And 6 states are now considering murder charges for abortion patients: South Carolina, Oklahoma, North Dakota, Texas, and Idaho. And 4 of those states allow the death penalty. We are living in a horrifying reality, but the Reproductive Freedom Caucus remains committed to keeping Minnesota a place where every person has the right to decide if, when, and how they become pregnant, have safe and healthy pregnancies, and be a state where every family can live, grow, and thrive. I want to turn it over to my co-chair from the House, Representative Leigh Finke.
Thank you, Erin. Senator Maye Quade, excuse me. Good morning, everyone. My name is Leigh Finke. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I represent District 66A in the Minnesota House and am the House Chair of the Reproductive Freedom Caucus for this session. I'm honored to be leading this caucus at the time that we find ourselves in. We have, coming out of the last session, historic wins to protect. Wins that were fought hard for by our leaders like Chair Herr and Chair Liebling and Chair Katiza-Watoon and Representative Agbaje, and the entire House, the entire body of the House of Representatives, DFL, really won what is a remarkable historic victories for reproductive freedom and trans rights in this country. And now we are facing an out-of-control, authoritarian, fascist movement to take away every single one of those wins in this country. There is no way for us to ignore what is happening or the fight that is ahead of us, but I know that we are prepared in the state of Minnesota for a whole government approach, top to bottom, to protect what we have done, and we will fight tirelessly to protect our wins. The Reproductive Freedom Caucus recognizes that bodily autonomy and the individual freedom to live well in this country, all of these fights are combined in one fight, So this morning, I want to take a moment to remember Sam Nordquist, a transgender man from Oakdale, Minnesota, who was held in captivity and tortured for months and then murdered and then had his body dumped at a lake in upstate New York, where he was recently discovered, ending a months-long search for him. This is all part of the same story that we are fighting, and it is important for me just to speak his name in this and to send our love to his family and to all of our trans family as we continue to fight for our freedom in this country, freedom from an out-of-control government seeking to eradicate trans people from social life, and the individual members of the society who are seeking to help. Thank you for giving me that moment. I think it's very important for us to recognize Sam this morning. Finally, the best thing that we can do, in my opinion, to fight against a world that we are trying to avoid is to build for a world that we all want to inhabit. I'm honored to be carrying the Equal Rights Amendment constitutional amendment bill in the legislature this year, and I know that we will do everything that we can to build an inclusive, free Minnesota with long-standing protections, constitutional permanent protections for our abortion rights, our reproductive freedoms, trans rights, and all of the bodily autonomy reality that we need to live in a free society. I know that the politics of the ERA have shifted. I look forward to the leadership coming from our Senate colleagues, and in the House, I will act as though this is going to happen because it needs to happen, whether it's this year, next year, or the year after. There is no difference to me and to the commitment of our caucus to make sure that the rights that we are fighting and that we have won are won in perpetuity through the constitutional amendment of the Equal Rights Amendment. Thank you, and I will pass it over to Senator Bolden.
Good morning. I'm Senator Liz Bolden. I represent District 25, which is most of Rochester and some areas north. We are in the midst of a crisis that directly threatens the health and autonomy of Minnesotans. The recent freeze on NIH funding imposed by the Trump administration is not merely a budgetary decision. It is a deliberate assault on reproductive health care, scientific progress, patients who count on that care, and the dedicated professionals who serve our communities. I'm deeply concerned about the immediate and long-term consequences of this funding freeze. The Trump administration's indiscriminate cuts to the NIH budget have already led to the suspension of critical research programs, research that has simply been wiped out. These cuts jeopardize advancements in maternal health, treatments of fertility, preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, and interventions for life-threatening conditions affecting women and those who give birth. The administration's actions have been met with legal challenges, and a federal judge has temporarily blocked some aspects of this policy, recognizing the profound harm it inflicts on medical research and patient care, but damage has already been done. Moreover, the administration's broader agenda has systematically undermined reproductive rights and access to care. These actions not only restrict funding for essential health services, but also erode the trust and morale of healthcare providers who are committed to offering comprehensive care to their patients. There are thousands of nurses and providers in my district, and I have the benefit of hearing their experiences. I spoke to a nurse last week who shared the story of a patient facing severe pregnancy complications. Due to the halted NIH funding research, promising treatments are now inaccessible, leaving both the patient and provider with fewer options. This is the human cost of the administration's reckless and ideologically driven decisions. And this is not just about science, it's about people. It's about the young woman struggling with infertility, the mother facing life-threatening complications, and the countless families who depend on evidence-based reproductive care. When we stall research, we stall progress. When we cut funding, we cut lives short. NIH funding must be restored, and the deeply dangerous and unpopular policies of the Trump administration in DC and our GOP counterparts right here in Minnesota must be stopped. My DFL colleagues and those in the Reproductive Freedom Caucus are committed to protecting reproductive freedoms for all. And with that, I will turn it over to Representative Esther Agbaje.
Thank you and good morning. My name is Esther Agbaje, and I represent a district that covers North Minneapolis and downtown Minneapolis. Black women continue to face disparities in reproductive health care, just like in any other area of life. Across the country, Black women are at least 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications, more so than white women. And here in Minnesota, Black Minnesotans represent 13% of the birthing population, but make up 23% of pregnancy-associated deaths. This is unacceptable, especially when the CDC estimates that more than 80% of these pregnancy-related deaths are preventable. Unfortunately, attacks on Medicaid and the abortion bans that were implemented in other parts of the country have already started to see negative effects, with more infant deaths particularly falling disproportionately on women of color, particularly Black women. The attacks on public health and equity will make it hard to know where to get effective care that will not lead to adverse outcomes, and should Medicaid payments be stopped, it could make it much more financially prohibitive for Black birthing people to have children. And the research shows that Black women and women of color are not inherently susceptible to bad outcomes in pregnancy. It is racism that makes it more likely. And the attacks we are facing now would seek to obscure that fact. We do have a long way to go, but at least here in Minnesota, we have already implemented policies and programs that support Black birthing people. And these programs also help everyone. Things like Minnesota Paid Family Leave, Earned Sick and Safe Time, funding for African American Babies Coalition and projects, having a supportive person in the birthing room, and also allowing for continuous medical assistance and coverage for children under the age of 6, while also expanding Minnesota Care to undocumented Minnesotans. When we take care of our most vulnerable, we help all of us. We must press on in the face of attacks from our federal government and from our own counterparts right here in the state of Minnesota. So that way we can ensure that we will make life better for every Minnesotan. And with that, I'll send it over now to my colleague, Representative Carly Katiza-Watun.
Good morning, and thanks for joining us today. I am Representative Carly Katiza-Watun. I represent Eden Prairie, District 49B in the Minnesota House, and I was the author of the Protect Reproductive Options Act of 2023. Last week, the Republican-led House Health Committee heard House File 24, which is a bill modifying current law to require physicians to utilize life-saving measures on infants delivered alive as a result of a pregnancy termination. This bill, just like the GOP amendment proposed with this language last year, is built on the false pretense that people wait until late in pregnancy to terminate unwanted pregnancies. We know that this is far from the truth. But Republicans refuse to cease this dangerous narrative and are now seeking to enshrine virtue signaling into state law. We need to be crystal clear about what this bill would do in practice. For pregnant people who do seek abortion late in pregnancy, it is because they have received the worst news of their life, that their loved and wanted child will not be compatible with life. For those who seek termination upon receiving this news, this bill would prohibit parents from holding and comforting their terminal newborn with the few moments of life that they have together before that child passes. Instead, Republicans want to rob grieving parents of this time by requiring physicians to exhaust all options to try to keep the child alive temporarily instead of providing comfort care like they do now, inflicting even more pain on both the parent and the child during the worst day of their life. Contrary to what they say on the campaign trail, when Republicans gain just a hint of power, they make it a priority to ban abortion and reduce and restrict other reproductive freedoms. I've said it before, and I will say it again. The government has no place in our personal health care decisions, period. With that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Representative Andy Smith.
Good morning, everyone. Representative Andy Smith. I represent District 25B, which is in Rochester, Minnesota. So please note, we've had now 2 Greater Minnesota members, so please no one say a group of mostly Twin Cities-based politicians. It's one of my pet peeves. So we've been talking about specific issues here this morning, very important ones. I want to step back a bit and talk about one of the roots of this movement that we are fighting, and that root is Christian nationalism. It's somewhat difficult for me to talk about. I grew up in evangelical conservative Christianity. I have incredibly fond memories of that in my family. My grandfather was a music minister. My dad is a Baptist minister. I served as a pastor in several churches before changing onto a different life path. But out of the depth of all those experiences and all those relationships and where our country is now, I want to sound the alarm of Christian nationalism. It is in our country, it is in our state, and it is in this very legislative session that we are in currently. I want to be clear what I mean when I say Christian nationalism. I'm referring to the belief that the United States is defined by a certain kind of Christianity, and that the government should take active steps to keep it that way. In other words, Christian nationalism is not a religious idea. I'm going to talk a lot about religious freedom, and we are huge proponents of that in our state, in our party, in the House, in the Senate. This idea is a political one, and is attempting to change our political institutions in the form of a very particular kind of Christianity. Some Minnesotans may have heard of things happening far off or other places in the country. Oklahoma requiring Bibles in every public school classroom. Right next door in South Dakota, where a group of 12 legislators put forward a bill that that state should recognize the kingship of Jesus Christ, whatever that means. But Minnesotans may not be aware of Christian nationalism right now in our state, and indeed, again, in this very legislature. House File 12, I'll speak about the House side, but these are alive and well in the Senate as well. House File 12 banishes trans girls from playing sports, based largely on a Christian nationalist view of gender essentialism, particularly around what counts as womanhood, and who gets to say what counts as womanhood. This bill seeks to roll back protections made last legislative session, recognizing the diversity of human experience and opinion regarding gender, and ensuring that everyone has access to community services like sports, and even more importantly, life-saving healthcare, regardless of gender identity. House File 19 seeks to implement a school voucher program that would funnel dollars from our public school system into private institutions, many of which are religious in nature. This flies in the face of our historic increases in funding education for every Minnesotan and the opportunities that comes with that education. House Files 24 and 25 seeks to impose a very particular view of human personhood before birth that's driven by conservative Christianity onto every childbearing person in the state, investing certain interpretations of ancient verses into modern operating rooms, taking public money from health providers and giving it to largely religious institutions that call themselves crisis pregnancy centers, who usually, rather than giving sound medical advice and choices, seeks to manipulate individuals away from a certain kind of health care. It's another effort to undo the expansions of reproductive freedom that we did last legislative session. And put simply, what we have said here today, and we will continue to say and continue to do, we will not let this happen. I mentioned, I think, earlier on that I went to a Christian school all growing up, and as I was thinking about what I was going to say to you all this morning, I kept thinking of the pledge to the Christian flag. I don't know if you guys have heard this before, if you haven't been in this context, but every morning we would stand up and say the Pledge of Allegiance, like most school children do, and then after that we said a pledge to the Christian flag. And it's the same rhythm, it's the same meter as the one to the American flag. You put your hand over your heart and you say, I pledge allegiance to the Christian flag and to the Savior for whose kingdom it stands, one Savior, crucified, risen, and coming again, with life and liberty for all who believe. And there is a certain implication there that many within Christian nationalism take very literally, that those who don't believe in that particular religious vision do not deserve life, and they do not deserve liberty. That's what we're fighting. We're fighting it here at the legislature, and we're fighting it out there in the world. We already talked about the horrible death and suffering of Sam Nordquist, but we want to celebrate his life as well. Now, that life was taken because of these ideas that are out in the world, that people are listening to and taking seriously. I've been in chapels, I've been in auditoriums where people use terms like holy war and crusade to talk about what we are doing here at the Capitol, and people are taking that seriously. But I want to say clearly, this is not Minnesota. This is not who we are. We as a people do not believe this. It's not as famous as the preamble of the United States Constitution, but we open our state constitution celebrating our religious liberty and our freedom. We, the people of the state of Minnesota, grateful to God for our civil and religious liberty and desiring to perpetuate its blessings and secure the same to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution. That's how we open our founding document of our state. We will not abandon that here in this year in 2025 or going forward. Minnesotans will not give away our liberty, our own and that of our Jewish, Muslim, Sikh, Christian, atheist, agnostic, Buddhist, Hindu, Mormon, Catholic, or any other neighbor. We will defend their liberty in this session and beyond. Thank you all. We do have time for questions if there are any.
Could someone talk about tangibly if the federal government were to enforce something like the Comstock Act? What steps could Minnesota legislators take this session and beyond to, I guess, sort of curb the effects of that?
I want to be really clear. The state of Minnesota cannot do anything about a national abortion ban, which is what the enforcement of Comstock would be. That is the really terrifying piece. In this state, I think it would be important to find out how the Comstock Act would be enforced. Can we still drive medication abortion to people? Can we still drive speculums and things that are used for pap smears or delivering children? Can we still mail those things? Because the things that are used in delivery and gynecological care are the same things that are used in abortion care. So it depends on the breadth of the enforcement and the consequences, but keep in mind that enforcement of Comstock is corporate in nature. And so I do want to be really clear that the state of Minnesota cannot stop a national abortion ban. We're hoping that there isn't one, but they don't have to pass any laws to make one. And I think with the right motivation, with the right kind of power, which they have, they can certainly implement one. And that's our fear, is that we will end up in a place where the status of abortion in Minnesota will be changed dramatically because of the enforcement of a law that already exists.
Can I just ask,
Yeah.
today in the House, there's a hearing about a bill that would deny undocumented, those who are undocumented, access to state health care and other state programs. Do you have any thoughts on that? And does that fit into some of this larger theme that you are expressing concern about?
Yeah, I'm assuming that's a Republican bill? Okay. Well, if Republicans want people to be sick and hurt and unhealthy in the state of Minnesota, at least they're saying it out loud. The Reproductive Freedom Caucus, we believe that every Minnesotan, regardless of status, should have health care, the ability to live, grow, and thrive in the state of Minnesota. We passed that in 23, 24, because we believe that, and any attempts to roll that back will be met with, I'm sure, fierce opposition in the House.
Yes, thank you, Senator. And yes, I just want to add that it's very clear, if you look at bill introductions and the hearings that we will have, and then eventually presumably the floor debates that we will have, we are going to see over and over again the kinds of attacks that you're referencing against people who are simply different. Pick the reason that they are different. Maybe they're from another country, maybe they are trans, maybe they have accessed abortion care in the past. It doesn't matter. It is all part of the same fight. The Venn diagram is a circle. We are working against what you heard Representative Smith speaking about, and it's coming for all of us.
Representative Finke, while you're up there, you talked about the ERA. Would we see language regarding pregnancy outcomes, some sort of similar language in this year's version?
The version of the ERA that was introduced in the House is the same language. It will be protective of our reproductive freedoms, inclusive of our trans community and intersex community, and the same bill that we tried to pass last session.
Kind of a follow-up on that. You said just now, you said that the politics of the ERA have shifted. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
Yes, we had a 15-hour debate on the House of Representatives floor last session, and we passed that bill through. Obviously, we do not have 68 Democratic votes in the House of Representatives this year. I consider that to be just one more obstacle and not a reason for us to shy away, but the politics are clearly different than they were when we were able to get it through the House last session. I look forward to great strength of leadership from the Senate this year as we push hard in the House to continue our work.
Getting it through would the caucus be willing to forego one of the clauses that's in there if it could get a Republican vote?
No.
I also want to say the politics on the ERA have shifted as well because of the federal effort to resegregate society and censor Americans. And so I think there's more support now than ever before to enshrine protections for all people in our Constitution than there were before.
Republicans have two bills one that would bar trans students from playing the sport that aligns with their gender identity, and another one that would bar them from going in the locker room or restaurant with their gender identity. Do you have any thoughts regarding those bills?
Sure. The first bill that you mentioned actually requires genital exams for 6-year-olds if somebody disputes their gender. So it's not about, it's like enforcing genital exams. It's wrong and it's unconstitutional and illegal. Same with the second bill that you mentioned. The courts have been asked and they have answered quite clearly that you can't treat children differently in schools as you treat their same and similar peers. So preventing children from using the restrooms or the locker rooms that align with their gender identity or from the sports team that align with their gender identity has already been ruled on. It's unconstitutional and it would be illegal to do so. So what they're doing is proposing an unconstitutional and illegal bill. And it's because they are trying to eradicate trans people from public life, and they're starting with kids, and it's harmful. And we just talked about Sam Nordquist. This exact same kind of language is what leads to the dehumanization that allows a person to be tortured and murdered and left in a ditch. And so every single time, and the research shows this, that there's a legislature that introduces a bill, particularly about trans kids, they are more at risk of suicide or suicidal ideation. They are literally working to kill trans kids with these bills, and they know it, and they don't care. It is wrong and it is shameful.
No further comment.
You have one more question? I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, excuse me, just the difference this year. Are you sort of playing defense more for some of these policies that passed over the last 2 years? Are there areas where you think you can make advances with the current legislature?
What, the Reproductive Freedom Caucus pieces? I think it's a both and. I think the defense that we're playing is particularly with the federal government. I think we feel very strong about keeping what we have here in Minnesota, but federalism still reigns supreme. And so we, can't protect Minnesota from a national abortion ban. I think that we can still continue to make strides to make sure that people have bodily autonomy. We are also doing that in the context of just heinous attacks on women, people of color, trans people, and LGBTQ people more broadly. And so that also plays a role in all of this. And I think efforts, as Esme mentioned, to cut people out of that bodily autonomy, I think that's what we're going to be playing defense here in Minnesota.
Yeah, and I would just add, I mentioned this briefly, but we have a whole of government approach to playing defense, right? And it does mean a great deal to all of the communities that are facing these threats, that we have somebody like Keith Ellison in the Attorney General's office to help us to bring these lawsuits, to make sure that what we have done, what laws we have created remain the law. And it is so important for Minnesotans to recognize that the White House can issue an executive order that does not change the laws in the state of Minnesota. We have laws. We had the most historic legislative success we have ever seen in the past biennium, and those laws stand, and we will defend them, and we will push forward, and we have allies outside of this building who are helping us defend them so that we can continue to grind forward with the work that we need to do to build a better future for everyone, which is the goal. We are building a future that does not yet exist, where everyone is loved and is able to access peace and healthcare, and we will do everything we can in that work.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.